Fear the old blood. German opened the door to the prospector's prize and was greeted with familiar impressions. The cozy lit premise with stuffed tables, varying from loud to low conversations, heated and compassionate alike. Some recognized him and gave him a raised cup as a greeting. He sauntered up to the bar where he would always find the shepherd presiding. They nodded to one another, and he sat down on a stool, Shepherd quick on filling a glass for him.
Thanks. Been much interest lately?
Course. Ever since the partnership went public, word has gotten out and interest is growing.
Good.
He held his hand around the glass as it stood on the counter.
How's the expansion, by the by? From your looks, it appears to be hardship aplenty.
It's plenty of work. But it's mostly Lawrence and Luna's bother.
Guessed as much. How's Maria? Been ages since last.
He delayed with his answer, allowing himself some private time with his thoughts. He was immersed by her mystery, her allure.
I don't know, Shepherd. I haven't been able to get her out of my thoughts recently.
He gently circled the glass, watching the beverage swirl.
I'm sure she'll pull through. She's the only one I'd say tougher than you.
He grinned encouragingly, but it had little honest effect.
Between you and me, I think she's still hurting. She might not be tougher, but her heart is definitely purer. And I think that's the problem. Only now, after so much time passed, do I clearly see.
Shepherd put down the glass he was polishing and rested his forearm on the counter.
She'd definitely changed those years ago. But don't put it on yourself. You couldn't have known.
Could I not? Is it not my job to know what's best for those I train, those I care for? He replied in a low voice.
Yeah, but past mistakes are just that. Past. Mustn't one always find a way to pull through? What else is there to do?
You're right, of course, even though it was wrong, what we did. All of it. I fear such an experience might have made her heart irreparable.
Ah, that's rubbish. Every heart is repairable.
Shepherd slammed his hand on the desk, and a tavern maid jumped in fright behind him.
Ho there, Vitus.
He greeted, and the man himself walked up behind German and sat down beside him. He did not look at either of them, nor provided any greeting, but stared out in front of him. His pale hair ruffled and hanging loosely and partially obscuring his face.
The usual?
He reacted to Shepherd's voice by looking over slowly.
No.
A deep breath later, he turned in his stool, facing German completely.
There's a troubling matter that recently came to my attention that you ought to know, German.
He spoke slowly and gravely, but German could sense the true extent of distress in his voice. Shepherd shooed away a patron from the bar, allowing them some seclusion from the populace.
We were on our way back from the church, as my team just finished up our prospecting trip. As we were exiting the premise, we spotted two men arguing. We tried to break it up, the two of them. The other was furious. He even seemed ill, or I don't really know how to describe it.
German rested his chin on his fist in contemplation and with a nod urged him to continue.
The other guy had no problem backing off, but the first, he was all riled up over nothing and he jabbered incoherently. When I tried to calm him, he shoved me with such strength. I was sorely surprised and just fell. Then,
He turned away and buried his face in his hands. He breathed heavily, but it was not from fear, he could tell.
Then what? Now, this fellow was strong. He shoved me several feet away, and you wouldn't know it just by looking at him. Then he came after me and so.
He bit his lip.
Well, he did not quit, and now he's dead.
German frowned and narrowed his eyes. Noticing his expression, Vitus instantly became slightly defensive in the tone.
His eyes, German. They were wrong. Not natural. And that strength. I can vouch for the kid doing the deed. It seemed the only thing to do. So what? Where is he now? His body, I mean. Me and the boys dragged off the body. Back to the church.
He stared into the glass and grunted.
It is what it is. Let's go. This needs to be fixed some way. German.
Vitus grabbed him as he was about to stand up.
I recognized him. That's what truly bothers me. Oh? From where? Well, from the church. From the blood administrations.
In the back rooms of the church stood Vitus and his unfortunate accomplices, gathered around a heap of a body. Dirt and grime concealed anything distinguishable of his garb, but their tattered nature and the ruffled unkempt hair told he was like any other resident of Old Yarnum. However, German did recognize him specifically.
Did you reach Lawrence and Luna?
Vitus asked.
They are both busy, as am I. Construction has just begun and they have both equipment and structural questions to attend to.
Right, of course. They all together stood and stared. He looked particularly ruffled up, and it all looked quite recent. He missed one shoe, and the lower part of his left sleeve had been torn off.
Did he harm you?
Not particularly. He was like an animal, just lunged at us.
Tell me, more detail.
Well, he shoved Vitus, so I grabbed the back of his shirt collar. He turned to me and just... He did not really fight. He just flung and threw his hands at me. So I stepped back. Thomas grabbed him and the guy bit down, threw his arm protection. When he did not let go, I just ended him. German nodded, retaining his eyes onto the lying figure.
Don't you recognize him, German? I do. He has been treated here. One of those that stayed for a longer period for his dose. So? So what?
They stood hesitantly quiet. It was Thomas that spoke out.
Can you not, I suppose, investigate him?
Like how? Sample his blood? Check the wounds? His digestive system? We are likely to find nothing. It has been too long. If you are having trouble with what has been done, it is too late to ask for his justification.
But German. Vitus moved over to stand by the head of the carcass. He must have been sick. Look at his eyes. He opened the lid to reveal a yellowish eyeball, half rolled back into the head. Red streaks ran all over, and the pupil was malformedly enlarged, making him look completely blind with its glossy and irregular shape. Have you seen anything like this? He leaned closer.
A birth defect, perhaps. It looks irritated or inflamed. I can't say it to be the product of illness, however.
They all appeared disappointed, with such an experience still to linger in their head. It must have been a horrible one for words not to convey it accurately.
Now, you all did good. I trust your judgment was sound, and that he attacked you first. So what say you?
Luna leaned back from the body.
Looks like a particularly nasty birth defect. Never known pupils to turn to mush like this.
I thought the same, but their account did not paint him as blind.
She nodded and looked back slowly to the man's eyes.
They certainly look dysfunctional. Could be an extraordinary birth defect.
Lawrence came back into the darkened room. Night had long since fallen, and it was nowadays the only time they had to spare for unconventional events like these.
Tired?
German asked, and Lawrence yawned.
Yeah, there is holy blood in him.
But that was expected. He reeks of alcohol, so that's the more obvious culprit, I'd say. How long had he been in treatment, Luna? She glanced down at a small board holding several papers.
A normal transfusion. 30 minutes for 2 broken fingers.
That's all? I thought he was treated over several days.
He accompanied a friend whom he visited. An Edvard, who was sent back home 3 days ago and has since been reported in good shape. He was treated 2 times a day for an hour in a span of a week. Edvard, that is.
Oh, I see.
But this eye... Lawrence stood by Luna and leaned casually over for a better look. Quite unique. Suppose the blood could have treated it.
Wait, the eye? Did he have those eyes when we treated him?
Luna and Lawrence looked at each other.
I can't say. He must not have. I would have remembered.
So this is just the main area you see here.
A series of symmetrical lines was pointed out as the two of them stood before the dug-up grounds of construction. And is this the actual research center? Lawrence pointed to a whole different section on the large drawing. The large shape on the paper, made out of several lines of measurement, was in detail partially beyond him, but he gathered that the church had a large hall in the front that merged with a longer perpendicular rectangle, making two large wings on both sides, and a giant square behind it, which was his current point of interest.
It is. Situated behind the main cathedral. Come here, see?
The foreman started walking at the edge of the paved ground, retaining the drawing in front of him as he went.
Where we are walking now, there will later be additional wings. This will define the cathedral, but per your request, this will be kept aside from the actual worshipping.
He stopped and held the drawing closer before Lawrence.
See here. There is only one single entrance from within the church to the research hall, so as to be more private from the locals.
Stacks and piles of stone, timber and planks were scattered around them atop the hill. They walked along the edge of the marking, defining what would be the main hall of worship. A part that seldom grazed the mind of Lawrence, but he recognized that some practiced their worship in such settings, while he did so in a laboratory, working with their mystery.
Here it will be. It will probably be done fairly quickly as soon as we have finished the residentials.
I can imagine. How are the living quarters coming along, if I may ask? He folded the drawing so fast, it looked like he crumpled it together and put it under his arm. He extended an arm and a finger further down at the hill's end, a few yards ahead.
As you can see, it's mostly interior work by now. Say, 2 more weeks, with our current pace, and you could start thinking about moving in.
Good. That is good to hear. I'm eager.
Oh, I bet. Best masons in these parts. My crew have done religious work all around. Quite refreshing to be building houses for a change.
He patted him on the back and started to head down.
We can have a look there before we head back to the drawing board.
Please. As they began the descent of the hill, a tall figure came towards them. It was German that ascended to meet them. He had his eyes fixed on Lawrence, and was making an unconscious and perpetual frown. He did not acknowledge when the foreman tipped his hat at him, and he stopped closely right in front of Lawrence.
You need to come to the old church. Things have developed.
He understood immediately what it was, and why it was not outright mentioned. We will have to discuss the research hall later, I'm afraid. I am urgently needed back at the headquarters.
Sure. Don't let me keep you from your true duty.
The foreman bowed slightly, and they both brushed hurriedly past him. Outstretched, and in poor shape overall, the disheveled appearance was one that likely had persisted before he had turned into a corpse. It was rather the crumpled physique that started the notion that something was wrong. It could be perceived as the muscles had rotted away in certain places, judging by his irregular form and slenderness. What struck Lawrence as unique was the massive and unkempt hair growth. Even the armpits had hair sticking out from underneath the tattered shirt. But what convinced him most about this particular case was his eyes. The same collapsed pupil, like yolk in a fried egg, merging with the color of the eye.
It's a pattern. Tell him, George.
When he and German had arrived, Luna and George had stood over the man where he lay, not being the first body presented in such a manner. So I was heading home from my mother's house, having visited and all. I turned down the usual alley, you know, the one just at Caraway Street, where it looks like a dead end. Anyway, I always take that shortcut from my mother's. I found him there in a corner, already dead. He looked like this, like he had been beaten to death. And when I saw his eyes, I came right back here.
You recognize him, right?
German turned to both Luna and Lawrence each. He seems familiar, yes, but...
No, I know him.
Luna said.
It has been long. But he was one of the first. That's how I remember. I was really scared to administer blood then. Remember every face from those days. I'm sure it's him.
That makes 5.
So? Lawrence said, knowing what German had meant.
We must at least consider it. This could be the blood.
Nothing so far tells me so. Only that 5 out of what surely lies in the hundreds have suffered like this.
Even if it is the blood,
Luna followed.
a more reasonable case is that specific bodies react unpredictably. Seen it with many other treatments. The individual anatomy has its own peculiarities and might for some reason not match as seamlessly as it should. We just need to be sure and figure out the details.
It bothered Lawrence more than he was willing to admit, the tone of Luna's voice. A desperate attempt to convince herself more than others, as he knew exactly her many different ways by now. With so many being treated and only now. Granted, perhaps it is in reaction to something, but we would have seen symptoms long ago, had it been simply the blood.
So?
German said with his eyebrows raised and a cold face.
It is not still worthy of consideration? Cruel as it may sound, were we not always in anticipation of side effects when we first began to administer blood?
German had a way to say the things others preferred to leave unsaid, particularly when they needed to be said, leaving most stunned.
I know someone who will be directly on top of this as soon as she hears about it.
No, you are right. And she should not be alone.
Luna lay her hand over her forehead.
There is just so much now, and this is probably nothing anyways. But you are right. We can at least keep an eye out for more cases.
That would be resourcefully costly, to say the least. Lawrence crossed his arms. What more can we do? Stalk them in the dead of night? Luna stared blankly while making various grimaces with her mouth while pondering.
Perhaps. Sounds excessive. But routine examinations only tell us so much. Besides, we would need a more extensive archive and filing system which...
We might be able to handle it.
German spoke, looking at George. Located near the soon-to-be giant cathedral, a small house had been built. Right at the base of the hill, in the shadow of the morning sun, away from the view of the town. A place just for them. A place to hone their skills and learn the craftsmanship behind the frequented trick weapons. This was their part of the world, and they fondly kept it secret from everyone. A sanctuary for the brave labyrinth dwellers. Within a little garden, atop a stone foundation beneath a great tree, stood a stone house with chapelesque ornamentations. German walked along the stone path, with all the 8 senior prospectors in tow, towards the little building. Inside was furnished with bookshelves brimming with tomes and volumes, a small table with 3 chairs standing by the crowded shelves. Next to a workbench was a fireplace, which he lit. He picked up a teapot and held it out towards anyone who would take it. It was taken from his hand and went to fetch water. From a cabinet, he picked out a glass jar with tea herbs and held it out to the rest with a questioning face. They nodded impatiently, which pleased him. Kenrick, the one that took it upon himself to fetch water, returned and handed the filled pot to German, who put it over the fireplace. Then he sat down at the little table, looking at his followers.
So, what's the job?
Pius asked.
Should we not wait for the tea?
Out of all, Maria sighed the loudest and lightly punched him in the shoulder, albeit with a smirk escaping her.
As we all along suspected,
he began, fingering casually on his teacup,
that this new treatment would have side effects. That's just how progress works. You test one thing, examine the results, and adapt accordingly.
He glanced over at the pot, then continued.
It was discovered that some strange behavior may be in relation to the old blood. Nothing is determined yet, but that is the job we will do.
The pot started howling from the hot air. Vitus started pouring the cups and German resumed.
We will simply check up on those treated for their own well-being. Seeing how one potential side effect is signs of irrational aggression, I volunteered us instead of some poor scholar or medic.
He blew on his tea and indulged a sip. That right? Do we know what to look for? Kenrick asked skeptically.
Irrational aggression, mainly?
Maria crossed her arms.
And yellow, deformed eyes. And since we do not know yet what causes these symptoms, we need to be everywhere. This could be the cause of something else. What makes this arduous is that we are potentially investigating something that is not of our concern. But to determine if blood administration is the cause, we must know its source, whatever it may be. What we will do is to ask around, examine the citizens for the signs, and report.
None looked either of the two in the eyes. Some scratched their chin, some their head. Some just stood, thinking to themselves. Sounds good, I suppose. A nice change from the labyrinth, I guess. Is it really necessary for us to do the job? I mean, like, is it even dangerous? German looked straight at Vitus, brought his cup to his mouth and drank his tea, maintaining his eyes fixed on him.
If you want danger, you need not take this assignment. There are plenty more in training. Even if you all were to refuse, I'll just put the apprentices to the task.
He placed the cup back on its little plate on the table and leaned forward, elbows resting on his legs.
But you know by now how careful I am. This is no different, and it needs to be done. I trust you lot a great deal more than any other. Worst case, give it a couple of weeks of detective work, then you might find your time wasted. Or perhaps you won't. Either way, it must be done.
And when we find someone suspicious?
Be sure to follow the targets carefully and take notes of details. Individuals you discover to match the profile must be documented and registered here.
And if they display that irrational aggression? He sighed uneasily.
Then do what must be done. If it is impossible to make them see reason.
We'll see to it.
Good. Go see at the research hall. Ask after Lawrence directly. He'll have more for you by now. And, naturally, no mention of what you do can leave the workshop.
They all nodded and slipped out of the house, hurriedly gulping down the tea. He leaned back in the chair and stretched out his legs. Maria joined him at the table and absent-mindedly swirled with her teacup.
So? What do you make of this? This hunt?
It must be done.
Quite.
What is the matter, German?
He crossed his arms and looked into the fireplace.
I'm thinking now, in light of those horrible symptoms, would they be enough for people to see?
Ah, I see. The blood has been administered, and they have had their taste. We can only do our best to vanquish whatever foul taint courses the old blood.
While having her attention directed on the transcript of her latest patient, Maria heard low and light footsteps of particular remark outside her compartment. She longed for a door that she could shut when they would move into the new church. Although most of the steps approaching brought her unnecessary agitation, these ones did not bother her. They slowly and carefully tipped up behind her, stopped for a moment, then continued, then stopped again.
Can I help you, Carol?
Without looking, she could picture the blush on Carol's face before she spoke up.
Sorry, you look busy. I shouldn't bother. You are never a bother. What's on your mind?
Carol held a large book under her arm and appeared unnerved by what she had come to inquire about, and now relaxed somewhat.
It's the special patients. I'm a bit nervous dealing with them. And I rather ask you to help over anyone else.
Maria felt a flash of admiration for Carol. It's not as usual as one would think to ask someone for help in such a manner, even to one's friends. She smiled warmly and fully disregarded her current work.
Oh, thank you. The situation with the recalled ones feels ever so awkward. And you are so good with people, so... No need to explain. I am happy to help. I would probably have gone to them anyhow.
They rounded a corner into a larger, more open area where a few individuals sat and waited. Doctors and nurses walked about taking notes and chatted with the patients.
Seems there are already plenty at work here.
Maria bumped Kara's shoulder. Further relief seemed to come about her.
Despite the time, I'm still not completely used to this many people working with us. But I guess Lawrence handles most of the directing, so we don't have to.
She nudged her back and pointed discreetly to a pair sitting on a bench, ignored by the bustling environment. A saddened boy sitting beside a woman with a mask of irritation about her. She walked over and Carol quickly followed. As she arrived, the mother stood quite aggressively and aimed her ire at her.
Finally! We have waited for hours without knowing what's going on. Do you know what this does to my poor boy? Yes, I apologize. But it is for the safety of our patients that we do this. Then perhaps you could have sent a letter, or someone less imposing than those brutes.
She had first thought the mother to be the special case, but now, according to her own words, it was the boy that the Germans lads had found suspicions about.
Well, as you can see, the doctors are all at work. But let's see what we can do here now.
She lit up in a smile and put on a much more engaged voice, despite the anxious mother, who indeed seemed to become less hostile by her friendly nature.
Come with us here. What is your name, miss? Engel Barathram.
Carol flipped through the papers in search for the name.
Your son is Anselm Barathram?
She finally asked, and the woman nodded. Maria took a glance in the papers to see that along his name was noted several treatments for breathing conditions.
So what is this all about? I was under the impression my son was cured. Do you have any idea how unbearable this treatment has been?
Maria smiled sympathetically and nodded for them all to remove themselves from the local space into a more private one.
No, I have never experienced what your son has. But I do remember how it was like treating him.
She sat down at a table within the small compartment and took the book from Carol, examining the pages further.
I understand he has an older brother. He has quite a temper. Sporadical, even.
The woman either blushed or fumed with embarrassment.
I hardly see why that applies here. Just precautions. You see, the blood, in all its grand capabilities, must not be taken for granted. Your son have endured multiple administrations during a brief period. While his condition may be gone, that amount of blood could potentially have side effects, if not kept at bay.
Carol gestured for the boy to sit down in a chair. During the explanation, the mother had gone from irritated to visibly worried.
Side effects?
Oh, you must forgive our caution. As of yet, we have not encountered any of the like. But we worry still of any potential reaction such large quantities may cause. It is godly blood, after all. She spoke more calmly and with greater confidence, later motioning for the woman to sit down as well. I'm going to be forward with you. The blood is something we here are very careful with. Much like one's own faith. A powerful thing indeed, but if misplaced, can produce the most horrible sins. To explain how the blood actually works would take me days, but rest assured, this is for your son's well-being. The woman grew calm and at least appeared reassured, but Maria's conscience had taken a toll. She knew why the boy was there, but also knew why the woman could not be made aware of that truth.
Oh, I understand. I apologize if I came across as rude. I should have known better than to distrust the good clerics of the church.
No need to be sorry. I see worried people every day. What don't we do for those we love? The mother returned to her son's side when she heard him sniffle and tear up at having a needle pierce his skin. Undoubtedly, that he had seen enough of them for a time to come. Carol swiftly took the tiny vial of the boy's blood and rushed off to have it examined. Seeing the boy still saddened, Maria leaned forward to meet his level. Do you know where we get the holy blood from? She asked the boy, who instantly forgot the sensation of pain. He rubbed his eyes and answered in a more spirited manner.
From the old labyrinth, right?
Maria nodded approvingly. That's right.
My dad knows one of the prospectors.
Maria cast a brief glance to the mother, who seemed lightened by her son's mood. Well, I'll have you know, I trained most of them. The boy became filled with suspicion, while still retaining much of the previous excitement. The statement was clearly hard for him to grasp.
Aren't you a cleric, miss?
You don't believe me? She feigned being hurt by the question, then adopted a sly expression. I can prove it. You want to meet them? His face grew into a radiant grin of anticipation, and upon reaching its pinnacle, he looked to his mother, who took his hand.
Well, you want to see the prospectors with a nice lady?
He nodded excessively. Follow me. It will be a while until the examination is done. Maria took them away from the area, further into the church. As she suspected, Kenrick and his apprentices were lounging on the ragged sofas around a low table. Dressed in their working garb, and with their gear and weapon laid to the side for the boy to see. Some grime of various natures still stained their clothes, perfectly so. Oh, Lady Maria. Kenrick threw up a hand as he saw her. All's well in the clinic?
Doing fine, Kenrick.
She raised her eyebrows and slyly looked down at Anselm.
Say,
This fellow here has a hard time believing I mentored many of you lot. You might be able to tell him otherwise? Kenrick looked casually at the boy, then back at her before he rocked himself up from the couch. He was a tall man with a tough face, decorated with a shortly trimmed beard to the point it was nearly just a stubble. A rather grim-looking character, if he wanted to. The boy, who understandably was shy in front of the prospectors, remained firm where he stood. She tells the truth, laddie. If you had been a prospector talking back to the Lady Maria, she'd have your arm twisted behind your back in the blink of an eye. He contorted his arm behind his back, showing how such a grip could have appeared. The boy was quite amused by the display. Yep, about the toughest teacher I've ever come across, but fair. He leaned closer to the kid, while shooting a knowing glare in her direction. Between you and me, I get why you had a hard time believing it. I mean, just look at her. When she raised a threatening arm towards Kenrick, he quickly jumped back, sniggering much like a little boy himself. She shook her head and turned to the boy. See what I have to deal with? Rough hands is the only thing these boys understand. Anselm turned back to his mother. I'm going to be a prospector when I grow up. I want to train with Lady Maria. She smiled and ruffled his hair. Thank the gods, that only happens when you are grown. I won't have you running around the labyrinth just yet. Your mother is right. One day when you've grown, you could come back and try your luck. Carol arrived with German in tow. He gave her a nod before walking to his companions, while Carol walked over to them. The test showed nothing strange. The procedure has left no remaining effects, and you can safely go home. Looking down at her son, then up at them, the mother truly seemed blessed by their encounter. Thank you so much. I never thought the church cared as much as they do. She laid an arm around her boy. What do we say to the good clerics? Thank you, and may the gods look upon you. Maria and Carol bowed and waved them off. German approached behind her. Was that one of them? Yes. Let us pray then, for the nights yet to come. The hour was so late that the street lanterns had faded completely. It was only the moon that lit Maria's way as she passed down the street. She fingered on the folded document in her inner pocket. The touch was enough for her to recall the exact address. It had implanted itself firmly in her memory due to the name right beside it. The street itself was not one of the larger ones, making a sharp turn of the former main street and curving down a small slope before curving once again in the opposite direction. The second curve was sloped downward rather steeply, and on her left lay a solid rock wall that she turned around along the way. The houses were smaller and not as densely packed, albeit in the typical Gothic fashion common to modern Yarnam architecture. On her right stood many buildings with slight variations to them, either being built at different times or deliberately to be different, yet the masonry was the same. The third of the dark brick houses had, like the rest, a small garden area before the entrance steps, and she entered through the metal fence gate, which stood open. One window was placed on both sides of the front door, both of which she suspected was not the room she sought. She jumped into a mist, up on the small roofing donning the upper doorframe, and further onto a minuscule balcony platform by the right side window, more so decorative than utilitarian. She peeked inside the darkness and saw a small room with a bed by the right wall and a boy sleeping soundly within. Little Anselm. 5 days and not a trace of a horrible affliction. A sigh of relief escaped her, and she jumped back down, much lighter than she was before. Turning back onto the main street, she saw German leaning against a lamppost, turning his head as she emerged. On nightly operations, he tended to wear a top hat and a long mantle over the standard burgundy coat. How was it?
It felt good. Nothing came of it.
She sighed, like she had done back at the window, but German's face remained cold.
Things have developed elsewhere. Come with me.
In Dr. Corin's clinic basement, away from the public eye, had he been brought. Looking at him from a few feet distance, she could only think back to the little boy who wanted to become a prospector. The patient had been tied with iron chains against a rolling stretcher.
He just tore through leather and rope restraints,
German told.
This was the only thing that would hold.
The patient seemed calm despite his condition. Presumably he had struggled for so long that he simply was left deprived of energy. Now he only lay there, mouth wide open and breathing heavy, chest rising and lowering.
Luna had already checked him. She and the doctor took a sample, but I thought you should see it.
The rib cage seemed to protrude slightly more than on a normal human. Or it could just be the enormous breath he sucked in. His nails were so long they looked like claws, and the hair looked more like that of a beast than that of a human. It had even started growing all over his left arm. He looked horrifying, and still she pitied him. Like she pitied the boy for having endured their multiple treatments.
Do you think it can be cured?
She asked, slightly surprised by her own quivering voice.
Luna did not seem optimistic. And I wonder, the pain he must suffer. Is it worth the wait?
She was revolted and still understanding of his opinion.
How many were there before him?
8.
He sounded as if admitting a horrible secret, and laid a hand on her shoulder.
Maria.
8 people. 8 of which she could have potentially treated. Was it luck, or could one of them just as well have been the boy who wanted to become a prospector.
I see the pain you experience, but don't let it keep you from seeing the many more lives it saves.
Do you think this sacrifice is really worth it, German?
I do.
And what about him? Would he have taken the blood had he known about this?
He was quiet for some time, looking at the horrible man.
I can't speak for him, but I would still say it is worth it. Had he not suffered still from his grave ailments?
To have died a monster.
Even if he knew the consequences, he would have wanted the mercy of a man. Whatever he is now, I would still give it.
That boy I treated. He and his mother were so happy. I tend to make many people happy these days, it seems. He had gone through many administrations. And I wonder, what would you do if the time came and you stood in front of him?
He removed his hand and took a deep breath.
I would show him mercy.
Beast. A secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. A transcription of the roar of a labyrinth beast. Beast is one of the early Carol runes, as well as one of the first to be deemed forbidden. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beasts.